From the many stories on the internet, reaching ghosts, goblins, demons, and even insane people. The stories that are either written to be scary or tell an interesting story based on real life. This is Etowah Core 2008.
For her birthday, I took my girl Katie to Arizona so we can stay with some of her friends and spend a few weeks partying and getting crazy and stuff before we head back to school for the year. We drove up in my dad's car. It's an old Ford make, and it's pretty beaten up. The road there was bumpy and long. Our relationship seemed to be at its strongest at the road. We were really in love. It was the first time I realized we had never been truly in love before. We were about halfway there when we realized that we were going to run out of gas long before the nearest petrol pump. Katie's head was out the window, sunglasses on in the blistering heat outside. Nothing but the wild desert landscape to be seen in all directions. We became frantic. We hadn't seen another car on the road in almost an hour. What if we broke down here, in the middle of the desert, with no food, and with no one else to find us? I sped up slightly, driven by these fears. It was then when we came across a gas station, smack bang in the middle of nowhere, in dry, empty nowhere. It was an old, worn-down servo. Long yellow grass blew in the breeze beneath it. Outside were two rusted gas pumps. At first, we didn't know if it was occupied. It seemed so lifeless. But as we pulled up and saw the petrol stains in the dirt, we were convinced otherwise. Katie started to refill the car, and I went inside to grab something to eat on the road. When I first went to open the door, it jammed. This dumbfounded me, so I looked up at the sign to check and was reassured that the store was open, according to the torn sign that hung between the dull yellow curtains. I pushed harder and harder, and with effort I got into the shop. Inside, it was abandoned and left to ruin. Complete aisles lay on the ground. The fridges were smashed. The glass was on the floor, and despite the brightness outside, the interior of the gas station was dark and bitterly cold. Then there came from behind me this quiet weeping. It sounded like a child's. I felt my heart race. Something was coming from the back room. I stepped over the smashed glass and twisted metal remnants on the floor, over where the patches of grass have grown through. I ran my hand along the wall and felt the crisscross of ivy beneath my fingers. It was overgrown. There came the crying again, and now I was facing the back room door. It was directly in front of me. I pushed the door open, and it creaked with rust in its joints. Inside, there lay several wooden steps into the basement. It was pitch black, and the smell was horrific. The drip drop of water alerted me that the fact that the basement was flooded. The water was up to my knees again. There came the crying, and a small splash in the far corner of the basement. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone there?" I started approaching the corner. The smell was horrible, and the cold water eventually got to me. The sobbing was just getting louder and louder, and in the corner I swore I saw something move against the shadows. "Hello?" I called out again. "What's wrong?" I eventually got to the corner. Still dark, I had to bend down to avoid the pipes, which leaked down my back and trickled down my spine. The figure was in front of me. She was very small and black, hunched over, sobbing quietly, head in its hands. "Why are you down here?" Then it stopped moving completely. It was still. All noise seemed to cease, but for the quiet dripping of the broken pipe somewhere behind me. I outstretched my arm to touch its tiny shoulder, but it then began to slowly turn into my direction, to look at me eye to eye. As its face swiveled around to look into mine, I remember screaming and swinging my head up in recoil, cracking it on the pipes above me. The face was white as a sheet, pale like a hideous moving mask. The eyes and mouth were completely black holes, huge, even widening. They were so huge that they almost consumed half of its entire face. As I desperately tried to escape, it splashed towards me at rapid speed, uncurling its long, thin fingers. It was wailing now, staring into me in its huge black eyes, and as I scrambled up the stairs with great difficulty, I felt my legs begin to give way beneath me. It sprinted out of the water and up the stairs towards me. I slammed the door, flipped the lock, and tore out of the store and into the old Ford. Katie began to laugh when she saw me, jeans wet, and I was trembling in sweat, soaking my chest, but I grabbed her and screamed at her to drive. For about half an hour, I could barely tell her what happened. She listened and gave me a look of sheer horror when I finally gave in and told her everything. She pulled the car to the side of the road and began to cry herself. I asked her what was wrong, but then she said,
I saw something while you were gone. When you were in the store, I was just putting the pump back when I saw this little girl and a man. Father, I guess. The man stared at me with his empty eyes and his hanging jaw. But the girl, oh God, the girl, she was staring straight at me, grinning with this huge smile that just stretched so far across her face. I couldn't see any hair on her, and her skin was dark as a shadow, and her smile was just shown through the window. I convinced myself it was a trick of an eye, and I looked away, but when I looked back, they were gone. Then a little while later, you came back out.
It was dusk by now. We had nowhere to stay. We had not traveled nearly as much as we hoped on that day, and the nearest motel meant going back to the gas station. So we just drove up into the roadside to where we were, into a clearing just a little way up, where people just sometimes camp. We had come the night after a big party. There was broken glass everywhere when we arrived. However, it was completely empty. After a while, I tried to reassure her that we were okay. I calmed her down, put my arms around her, and we started to kiss. I moved closer to her, and then she suddenly screamed like hell itself.
It's her! It's her!
She screeched. Fumbling up to start the engine, I turned in time just to witness a small black face, grinning ear to ear with only darkness inside. It was crawling into the car through my open window, with its limbs splayed out like an insect. Oh my god, it had so many limbs. Way too many long arms. The fingers felt my face like antennae. We sped off, back down onto the road. Back on the road, nothing seemed right. There were no stars, that was what I noticed at first. I was too shaken to think much of it, but there were no clouds that could be blotting them out. There was just the vast night sky, devoid of all light. Then a few minutes later, after we'd been driving forward, still sweating and breathing heavily, we passed the gas station. My heart skipped a beat. The gas station was half an hour away in the opposite direction. All the lights were on, and I saw the door sliding open. As we shot past, Katie was in such hysterics, she found it hard to keep driving. We stopped the car in the middle of the lonely road. I decided that if we switched seats, that I could drive. She shoveled across from her seat to mine, and I opened the door to get out. As soon as I stepped out, a foul stench of the basement overwhelmed me. I gagged, then I vomited down the side of the car. It was then I noticed the runner, a pale white thing springing towards us through the fog, its limbs practically a blur. I could make out no face. How long had it been following us, running after us in the night? I got into the driver's seat as quickly as possible, then we drove off again, not talking. Katie whimpered and I silently prayed. Then we passed the gas station again. The door was now wide open. Two figures were standing at the door, waiting. As we forced ourselves on, we both became aware of a soft, barely audible weeping in the back seat. Neither of us dared turn around. Ignore it, I whispered, my trembling hands gripping the steering wheel. Katie was curled into a fetal position, holding her head against her hands. Her wailing increased, becoming extremely loud, ear-piercing, and horrific. I finally ordered myself to end it and look behind me. For a split second, I thought it was the girl in the white dress looking back up at me. But then she was gone, as soon as she appeared. I checked the seats carefully, but there was nothing. In my tiredness and fear, I had completely lost track of the road. I drove on, and all through the night Katie whispered. I touched her once, but then she screamed. I never tried it again after that. The noises from the back seat were starting up again. We passed the gas station twice. The people were at the door were getting closer and clearer every time. The finest slither of red light had begun to settle on the horizon. It was still dark as hell, but at least I could see the road ahead of me. Katie had been silent, face concealed under her hands for some time. I decided to check the time, so I turned on the radio. At first, there was only static. Instead of time or anything at all, the digital clock simply appeared black. I fiddled with the dial, trying to change the station. In between static, I found only one audible channel. It had a high-pitched buzz in the background, and a man was muttering names and the numbers under his breath.
29, Lucy, 30, Adam, 31, Katie.
I switched back to static. I knew which name was next. When we got to Katie's friend's house, it was morning. It was overcast and everywhere had the smell of rain on it. Her friends weren't home. Katie's friends lived way out in the country with no one else around in a mile. The grass was climbing the walls outside. How long have they been out? As soon as we were inside, Katie started whimpering again. I realized that while she had been silent, she was biting her lips. Blood was trickling down her chin, and the skin around her mouth was torn and chewed through. She grabbed the newspaper and some masking tape off the table. It began blocking out the windows. After the night's events, I didn't know whether I'd be insane to join her or stop her. I just simply watched. She covered the windows, jammed the doors, and turned off the lights. For some time, it could have been minutes or hours, but we just sat there in the dark. I offered to turn the television on. Katie said nothing, sitting blank and comatose. I turned the television on anyways. A grainy black and white image flickered to life before us. A white face with empty eyes and an impossible huge smile flashed up. The smile grew wider and wider the longer we stared into it. There came the sound of weeping. From the television or from the house? I couldn't tell. We turned off the TV. It's been 3 whole days now. I haven't seen Kitty at all today. She spends most of her time in the closet crying. I once tore the door open and screamed at her face, but then she screamed back. Her face contorting into something more grotesque and inhuman. I slammed it into her face. The phone rings often. A voice, my mother, I believe. She was whispering something under her breath. I can only catch snippets of what it said.
Come back. You're always welcome to come back.
Sometimes in the background, I can hear quiet chuckling. I usually hang out without saying a thing. The bathroom is shining white. I hear the shower running and will walk in to find nothing. Nothing at all. Then when I'm in the bathroom, I hear the television flick back on. It always goes to that face. In the background, there are mothering voices now. I've called the police twice, as a matter of fact. I get this whispery woman's voice. I called Katie's friends too, just as fruitlessly. There are knocks at the door a lot now, through the newspaper and on the other side of the window. I see their hands slam against the glass and slide down. They do this for hours on end sometimes, and they press their eyes up against the glass through the holes of the newspapers. At night, we hear screaming from the guest room. I boarded it up. Sometimes I find tiny pieces of glass on the ground. A leak sprang up about a day ago in my room downstairs. Black spots of mold have been appearing on the walls. There is a smell throughout the house, seeping in into my room. The odor of decay. The odor from the basement. I pray. I pray hopelessly, and I wish.